So I'm going to make a kick drum using Sample Magic Stacker, which is a drum computer sampler all-in-one. If you load it up, it'll look a bit like this, and this is the default patch that it loads up. What this is really is 3 samplers and an oscillator with some send effects. We've got some delay and some convolution reverb. Whilst we're on this global tab, you can see we can load various presets, and we can go back. I'm actually going to stick with the default patch, which sounds a little bit like this, and the keen-eared among you will hear that's actually a sine wave, and we can see that on Wave Window what that looks like. So to begin with, I need to make a couple of changes to these global tabs before I actually move on to designing the sound. I mean, firstly, if you hear, if I move up and down the keyboard, the oscillator is having its pitch tracked by the keyboard input, so I want to disable that. Obviously, if you want to play your kick like a bass line, you'll need to have it enabled, or you could resample it or whatever. But for now, I'm going to disable that by clicking on these 4 oscillators where the key tracking is. So now, as I move up and down the keyboard, that's not tracking pitch anymore. Secondly, you can hear that it's also having the amplitude influenced by the velocity, so I'm going to disable that too. It's a really easy thing to add back in later if we do want to have our kick respond to velocity, but I just prefer to disable it, particularly when starting out with the sound. Let's start off with the oscillator, which is in blue. You can see, if I just press play, we've got a kick on each beat of the bar. We can go between a triangle wave and a square wave, which is kind of useful a bit later. We've also got a volume control. We've got some soft clipping, a parameter to emphasize the click at the front of the sound, and a simple tuning. Just underneath we have an Amplitude Envelope tab. Now if I load up Exoscope, you should be able to see what our kick looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to expand the sort of time we're looking at, and that'll elongate our kick slightly. If we delete this breakpoint, we can go between a linear fade, an exponential, or a slightly more useful logarithmic. And of course you can add as many breakpoints into this sound as you want. If you want a slightly more custom shape, although I'm just going to keep it like this for now. We've also got some white noise here. If I turn this up, well, I say white noise, it's not got much low end to it, so it's probably blue noise. But you can see we've got a bunch of frequencies there. I'm going to enable this Bandpass Filter from this drop down, and now we can sort of sweep those frequencies around. You've also got a sort of sample rate reduction control there, and something to change the width of the noise, which sounds a bit like sample delay or something. Obviously it's really important to have a good mono image for your kicks, but in the higher frequencies I'm not too fussed. We've also got a resonance control there, but I don't really want it. I'm going to have a look at the white noises amplitude envelope and delete this breakpoint in the middle and pull this down to a very short, sharp blast. The white noise is here to do a couple of things really. It helps simulate the beta at the front of the kick, and it will help our kick come through on in sort of denser mixes. So if we re-enable our oscillator, we can get a sort of nice blend, something like that. Next to our amplitude envelope, we've got a pitch envelope tab, and what you can see, our fundamental is sitting at what Span says is C2, but what Stacker says is C1. There seems to be a lot of disparity between what certain softwares correlate between MIDI pitches and frequencies, but it doesn't really matter. Let's add another breakpoint and increase the start position of our pitch envelope, and similarly to our amplitude envelope and noise envelope, we can change the curvature. Let's just boost the white noise a little bit. What's really good about this is we can add in another breakpoint. Oops. and change the sort of end position of our kick to get some really low frequencies in there, if we so choose. The idea of the white noise is, I don't really want to be able to hear it, but if I was to mute it out, we can definitely tell that something's been lost. So you need to try and find a balance in terms of volume there. Let's move on to our modulation. We've got 4 modulation sources available. I'm going to drop down here and go into the mod envelope and choose a preset. I mean, before I do that, I'll just show you what can be done with these. These are all like customizable LFOs, a bit like the Performer in Massive, but way more advanced, I suppose, but probably closer to FM8's envelopes. And you can add all sorts of crazy shapes. But like I say, I'm just going to load a simple zap to get a sort of envelope type shape. Importantly, I'm going to disable the loop, which will turn this away from an LFO/function generator into just a traditional envelope. For now, I'm just going to have a look at this modulation matrix and change mod 1 to control the synths noise filter. And if we disable the oscillator for now, it's going to open up the envelope so we can hear more clearly what the mod will do. As I change the depth, you can hear a sweep on this filter, and I can increase its effect. So let's change our envelope shape back and re-enable our oscillator. So things sounding fine so far. We can come back to this a little bit later as well. For now, I'm going to mute that and move on to our first sample. So the first thing to do is I'm going to load in a kick drum that I extrapolated from the loop I was messing around with earlier, which is from a real recording. Now you can hear if I play this from the keyboard, there's a click at the end. So let's just pull in the end position of that loop. What I'm going to want to do here is I'm going to enable our sort of filter. And there's not a ton of sub-frequencies in this, but I do want to definitely separate it from our oscillator. So I'm just going to pull the high pass up to about 100 or there or thereabouts. We could also low pass this as well, but all of those complex high frequencies is something that I kind of quite want from this sound. We've also got an amplitude envelope we can enable. And just like what we're doing with our white noise, I just kind of want the front of the sound. That's quite difficult to hear in isolation, so let's re-enable our oscillator and just tweak it until it sounds about there. And again, let's just adjust the volume. Something like that sounds good. If we mute it out, there we go, that sounds good to me. We've also got the option to invert the stereo image. We could monoize it by using just the left or right channels, or we could sum them, I think, as well. And we can also invert the phase, but we don't need to worry about that too much at the moment. Let's move on to the second sampler, where I'm going to load a hi-hat. So if we go to this Sample Magic pack, I don't know, Minimal Tech House, and just go into the drum hits. We're looking for a closed hi-hat. I'm pretty sure any of them will do. Perfect. Let's enable our amplitude envelope. And again, just get the front of the sound going. Now if we solo this, you can see on span we've got these quite spiky frequencies here, about 7 and a bit and 13. That probably won't come across too well if you're listening on laptop speakers, but if you've got headphones or half decent monitors, that might be a little bit more obvious. I'm going to go into the effects section, and what you'll notice by the color coding is the effects section is dedicated for each of the voices. So I'm going to enable the EQ, and I'm going to crank the Q up and tune the first 1 to about, what was it, 7.5 or something. And as I increase the gain, you can hear that sort of slightly spiky frequency. So let's attenuate that until it's a bit smoother. And then similarly with the second one, which is about 13. We don't want that. So let's dip it back down. There's not much bottom end in the sounds. There's no point in using the filter. If I disable the EQ, you can see those frequencies jump up on span, and you might be able to hear them as well. So that's just keeping everything a little bit smoother. So things sounding good so far, and this is pretty much just a standard rudimentary kick. Let's just balance the hi-hat. Again, we want a similar, it shouldn't be that audible. Bring the low pass down a tiny bit on it. Okay, so that's kind of just where you'd start out. If you want to push the sound a little bit further, if we go back to our parameters for our kick drum, I'm going to just introduce a tiny little bit of odd harmonics with the triangle wave, and I'm going to set mod 1 to change the wave of our oscillator, and that's just going to move slightly between the triangle wave back to the sine. If we solo that and move the white noise out, you can hear a little bit what's going on there. Now I want to go for like very, very subtle values, because it can quite quickly destroy the sound if you're not careful. Let's also add in a little bit of soft clipping, which weirdly attenuates some of the wave shaping we've done there. Let's crank the click up as well. So if we go into the effects tab of our sound, we'll see we've got a bunch of effects here. We've got some digital distortion, where we've got sample rate reduction and sample rate reduction and bit depth reduction, I should say. We've got a filter distortion, and we've got a flanger, which pretty useless for a kick drum. We've got some ring modulation and frequency shifting, and we've got a basic EQ and filter. Let's enable the distortion and just crank the drive up a little bit. Now we've got different algorithms here. I'm quite a big fan of sine shaping. So again, let's select in our modulation matrix mod 1 to control the synth, drive, and let's take that down to 0 and just increase it a little bit there. Now if that sounds a little bit too sharp, you can always take the mix down. It's adding a little bit of zap to the front of the sound. Not too much more to do. Let's do some sort of slightly broader EQ. Just a sound, we can tune our EQ down to like 45 Hertz and just increase the bottom end a bit. We're clipping a little bit in live, but no, we're okay actually. And I'm just going to do a bit of a boost around 3.5. So everything sounding good. That's it for now. Enjoy.